Are you ready?
Oh, yeah!
Strap yourselves in for the Gaming Hub with your hosts, Tyler.
You can't handle the truth!
Graham.
The force is strong in this way.
And Steven.
You cannot be serious!
Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Gaming Hub. This is episode number 136, and we're here with a special episode. For this one, we're doing a special Red Dead Redemption 2 Spoilercast review, and I stress Spoilercast because we are going to be talking details from the story and characters and what happens in the game as we go. So if you haven't played the game yet and don't want anything ruined for you, turn back now, because you don't even want to jump ahead to anything, because we might reveal stuff as we go throughout the entire episode. So please, if you're not looking to have anything spoiled, turn back now. But I'm joined by Steven from the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good.
I'm excited to talk about this game.
I know it's we're recording this about a month after its release, but it took me over 3 weeks, I think, to finish it. It took you a little bit longer than that. It's a big game. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here. So this isn't the type of game that you can just knock out in a week unless you just aren't going to sleep or do anything else in your life. So it's about 65 hours for the story, and that's if you don't spend too much time doing other stuff. So
yeah, and that's if you're efficient about like how you get from some of the story points or doing the story missions, because sometimes you have the option of doing like two in a row. Mm-hmm. So if you choose them wrong, you might end up on the other side of the map, and then you have to spend 10 minutes getting across the map. But
yeah. And I never, I'll be honest, I didn't spend too much time doing a lot of the hunting stuff and all that type of thing. I'm going to actually do that when I play through it again. But the first time through, I just really didn't, because I wanted to get through the story. I knew we wanted to record this episode and didn't want to make people wait till Christmas to hear it. So, but anyway, let's start just talking some general impressions of the game. So just, without getting into too much detail, just your general thoughts on it, and we'll give it a score at the end, but just general thoughts on the game.
Yeah, it's an amazing, phenomenal game. It really pulls you in and holds on to you, and you're very invested in the story. I don't want to say you get invested super quick, because I didn't. It took a couple missions into maybe even a couple chapters to really start getting invested, super invested. But the world's beautiful. There's a lot to do in it. There are a lot of little tiny glitches, but that are annoying enough to really yank you out of being in depth in the world. You're you're so invested, and you feel like you're in the world of Red Dead Redemption 2, and then these glitches come, and it literally does yank you out because you're so invested in it. And that's frustrating and annoying, but at the same time, that's how you know that the game is so good, is that you feel like you're being yanked, rather than it's just oh yeah, this is a video game. It's not like that with this game. It's I'll say yank again for those kids at home, but that's really what it is. It's the best way to describe it.
Well, the game, for me, when the game's at its best, you feel like you're an outlaw in the old, Wild West. Playing through, and you're completely sucked into what the game is doing. I'm with you. It took me a little bit of time to warm up to it. I wasn't sure what to think when I was playing through, that snow level and stuff. But I think once you get to the very first camp outside of the mountains, the missions there really start to tell the story more. The snow levels are kind of meant to introduce everything and teach you mechanics and stuff like that. So once we got through that and into the main story, and you see that character building and development that Rockstar is so good at, then for me it just took off, and it became honestly one of the best games I've ever played. So those are, and the glitches like you brought up, yeah, there's a couple of them, and we have some community feedback on the game as well that we're going to share as we go through this, and they bring up some of that as well. There's two in particular for me that really stand out, but we'll get to that. So let's talk about story first of all, because Rockstar games, they're not necessarily technical masterpieces all the time or ever, in my opinion, But where they really shine is in their characters and their story and just the world in general. And we'll talk about the world in a bit, but let's talk about story. How much did you enjoy the story, or did you enjoy the story of Red Dead 2 and compare it to other Rockstar games?
I absolutely adored the story. Like once I really got invested in, and it took like 2 chapters. And I like after the snow level, so that might have actually been like chapter 3 is when I really started getting invested. But yeah, this was the best of Rockstar stories in my opinion, and I'd even say it's probably one of the best video game stories of all time. Like compared to Red Dead 1, which started really good and ended really good, it just had that rough middle part that honestly I'd forgotten about, and that's how much I didn't enjoy it, or just forgettable, was the Mexico part. And it wasn't until I watched like a recap before I played Red Dead Redemption 2 that I remembered how long Mexico could take, and that really kind of did bring down the greatness of the first story. Grand Theft Auto 4 had a really good story. Grand Theft Auto 5 also had a really good story, but both the Grand Theft Auto games, or all the Grand Theft Auto games, tend to be more satirical takes on like the culture of the world at the time of, the video game was made. And in a lot of ways even more
absolutely
taking on a satirical take of American culture, because that's where most of those games have been set. But this game really it's serious in not a bad way, because there are it's not, take yourself way too seriously. There are a lot of fun moments in it, but it's probably one of the best video game stories I've ever played.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. And your main protagonist in the game is Arthur Morgan. You play as him. John Marston's in the game and proves to play a pretty big part in the game as it progresses. But, which goes against, by the way, what Rockstar said initially. Remember, they were initially saying, John Marston's not a playable character.
Yeah, but that's to throw you
I
off
know. Those are all lies. But yeah, so I read something, actually, an opinion. I don't remember where it's from. I wish I did so I could give it credit here. But that I think summed up why I love the story of this game so much. So often in games where you get a character, think like Tomb Raider, for example. You start a game with the protagonist at their worst, or at their weakest. They have no skills yet, and you have to acquire the skills, and you have to acquire weapons and do all that stuff, right? Yeah. Whereas in this game, you start with Morgan at his peak, and then he gets weaker and weaker as the game progresses. And you see kind of his, I don't want to say downfall, because I think in a moral and ethical way, he really rises throughout the game. But in terms of physical strength, he becomes weaker as the game progresses. And you see kind of his demise as the game goes on, and that goes against what so many games do that are like this. So for that reason alone, I think it stands out in a really great way and makes it really interesting. So were you taken... we're going to jump around a little here throughout the story, but it just brings me to this question. Were you sort of surprised by the tuberculosis angle with Arthur Morgan?
Yes and no. I mean, I didn't... I think I may have realized he was kind of coughing, but this is where video games kind of suck compared to some of the other forms of art, where I didn't really start playing for long periods in consecutive days until about the chapter before that happened. So I really didn't notice it, coming. And then all of a sudden, he just starts coughing, and then he passes out, and I'm like, oh yeah, something's wrong with this guy. And then, you get diagnosed with tuberculosis, and then Arthur kind of hides it from everybody for a long time. But yeah, it did hit me hard. I got sad, because as soon as that happened, you knew exactly how it was going to end. You didn't know exactly in which way, but you knew the ending for Arthur Morgan, what was going to happen. And that one sucked. that hurt my soul a little bit.
Yeah. And he he kind of gets as much of a hero's death as you can when, being an outlaw and all. But we were kind of, as we were playing the game through, we were kind of talking to each other about how we thought it might end. And we were kind of both speculating that this might end with Arthur dying to save John. And they built it up well because Arthur's relationship with John was very strained at the beginning of the game. And it got better and better as the game went on. They came to understand each other more. And Arthur came to see John sort of as like the one hope in the gang. Like he could get out and be something more and be something better. And not live that life forever. So in the end, he sort of, I don't want to say he sacrificed himself because he knew that he was going to die. But he made his death, I think, really mean something in the way that I think he could go knowing that he gave, or helped at least give them, John and his family, a chance to be something more. Is that kind of how you saw it turning out? Were you surprised by the ending, or at least Arthur's ending? Because that's not the true ending of the game, but...
No, I wasn't really surprised. Like, it was kind of, like, the optimist in me, and yes, for those that listen, I do have an optimistic side sometimes. I wanted Arthur to, like, kind of sail off into the sunset, go live in a tropical island that would help his tuberculosis, and, like, kind of in the same way, well, I'm a spoiled tombstone, so, close your ears for 10 seconds. But the same way that Doc Holliday ended in Tombstone, like sitting in Arizona in the heat, just kind of like resting. Like that's kind of what I had hoped, but I understood why they didn't. And I did like the ending, but I was sad. It took me a minute to really get invested and liked Arthur as a character. But once I did, I got really attached to him. And it made me really sad.
Same here, and I think that's kind of by design. I don't think you're supposed to love him right away. Because he's definitely not the smartest guy in the gang. He's sort of the brute force of the gang, He's the guy that, Dutch chooses when something nasty needs to be done. So, but you see his character really develop and grow as the game goes on, even though he's sort of, becoming weaker. And I think it does, quite a bit for him as a character. I think it makes him vulnerable in many ways. And that's always a good recipe for character development. So, outside of Arthur Morgan, we'll talk about John in a second, but one character whose arc I absolutely loved throughout the story was Sadie's. And I think you did as well. But kind of seeing her go from sort of being rescued, and, she was afraid for her life, to becoming just a complete badass at the end. And a bounty hunter. What were your thoughts on kind of her journey in the story? Because she's not a main character, but she sort of plays a key role.
Yeah, I really liked her up until the epilogues. And I didn't hate her in the epilogues. I thought they kind of pushed it a little too far. I liked her though for the main parts of the story until the epilogue started. I assume you've all played this since you're listening to this, I'd hope, unless you just want the stuff spoiled for you. I thought they did a good job of kind of changing her to she becomes hardened because of what she's seen, and then she also becomes, as you said, a badass, which is pretty cool. And I really enjoyed the missions that I played with her until I was John. And when I was playing as John, I'm like, John, you're such an idiot. Just hang out with Abigail, stay safe, raise your kid. And obviously I know how the story, unfolds for John, but it kind of made me angry at Sadie in some ways. Don't get me wrong, I did really want to go kill Micah at the very end of the game. That was something I wanted to do. I had hoped Arthur did it before the epilogue started, but it didn't happen that way. But I just kind of got mad at Sadie, and that might be good writing as well, because I got attached to John and I wanted John to succeed so bad at being out of the life, more because of how Arthur like really wanted John to kind of succeed outside of the life of, you know, being an outlaw. And it kind of made me like a little angry at Sadie in some ways. And I mean, like I said, that's good writing for them, but so it kind of ruined my love of Sadie, that last two epilogues.
I think it's really interesting though, because I think that in the actual chapters of the game, through chapter 6, she is sort of the opposite arc of Arthur. Like, he starts out as all in with the gang, you know, he's probably Dutch's most loyal gang member. And he, through the things he sees and experiences, he comes to want out of this life. And he sort of sees that, you know, this way of life is ending. There's many times where he mentions that, you know, the world's becoming more civilized, you know, people like us are getting forced out, and soon we're just going to be gone. That's said many times throughout the story. But whereas he is coming to that conclusion that he no longer wants this life, she at the same time starts out where Arthur wants to be at the end, but then progresses along this path of wanting to hang on to that outlaw gunslinger lifestyle more and more. So she's sort of the opposite. And I think also during the epilogues, she represents that pull at John of, like, he wants a better life, he wants the house and the family and all this stuff and to be a rancher, but he still feels that pull. It's kind of like the you are who you are argument, you know, and you can't change it.
Yeah.
She represents that in him. So every time he gets back into something, it's usually her bringing him back in, right? So I found it interesting there, too, how she kind of played a couple different storytelling roles throughout the game, by being the opposite of Arthur's arc, and then by being that pull back into that life for John that he has to continue to resist. And you see, like, when he gets her to, at the end, to come stay on the ranch, like, it's almost like he conquered himself in that moment too, you know, and is like, nope, this is what I want now.
Yeah. And
yeah, go ahead.
But I disagree a little with you on why Sadie kind of went all in. I mean, you never really did say a reason why she did. In my opinion, why she kind of went all in is because she knew that she had the perfect life in her mind before, like, at the events of the prologue, when she's in that, like, cabin up in the mountains with her husband, and then the O'Driscolls come and they, you know, murder her husband, and she hides. And then, like, some of the lines of dialogue she has kind of hints at, like, she knows she can never have that again, so she's like, well, I'm just going to do something where I have the potential to die. And that's kind of the way it is. She's like, I am going to keep doing these bounty hunting things. If someone kills me, then someone kills me, and then I get to go, you know, be with my husband again. That's what I think she said that even once. Mm-hmm. And that's, like, I understood it a lot. It almost felt like she was kind of dragging John back into the game with her, and that kind of made me upset, because it was like, John has the chance to have what you had, like, let him kind of have that opportunity.
And you see by the end, and, you know, and then I have one other thing to say on Sadie, but you see at the end where, you know, John no longer is being pulled back to it, and that shows in the, you know, the original game, which is the sequel, I guess, in terms of timeline. But in the original, he doesn't do any of the stuff that he does by choice. Like, he's being forced into it by, you know, the Pinkertons or whatever, and he's sort of that reluctant, you know, whatever. So he doesn't, like, go gleefully back into the game. But the other thing on Sadie, before we move on, because I want to talk about Dutch and Micah a little bit, but with Sadie, like, it's almost like she rejected civilization because the world was too evil a place that you can never have that. Truly, you know, whereas Arthur, I think, rejected the other side of it because he saw that more and more that A, civilization was going to crush that lifestyle anyway, but B, that was sort of the way to go to have happiness. Because every time You know, it's every so often in the game, I don't remember her name, maybe you remember, but Arthur's like, you know, ex, she would show up and be that pull for him back to sort of that civilized life, you know, and he'd have to make that decision. So it's, I found that they were contrasting there in a really good way, at least for me. So, but, well, let's talk about Dutch. So Dutch is the leader of the gang, and when the game starts, like, you know, he seems like he's kind of got it together, but he completely devolves as the game progresses into basically madness. So tell me your thoughts on him and kind of his journey throughout the game.
Yeah, it was kind of it started out really slow. It was hinted at a lot because they start by hinting that, you know, Dutch kind of went crazy in Blackwater and choked a girl to death or something like that. And then, like, Dutch just keeps wanting to, like, you know, have the gang be successful and then escape and live happily ever after on an island somewhere, or like, what was it, in New Zealand or Tahiti, I think were the two options.
Yeah, Tahiti, I think, was the big one that they talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden he just becomes, he becomes paranoid that, like, the gang's gonna, like, betray him, which it's not entirely not happening, but it's not really happening. And I think a lot of that has to do with Micah whispering things into his ears, especially late in the game. But you can see the madness start at as early as chapter 4, when he kills the Mexican dude. Oh my gosh, the guy who runs Saint Denis unofficially, and he chokes or he drowns him and then feeds him to a gator.
Yeah.
I can't remember that guy's name.
Wasn't he Italian, I think?
Or Italian.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember the character's name either. Apologies, but yeah, I can see that. That was a really brutal moment for him. Dude, I kind of expected, because I kind of got a sense through the game that he didn't really want the tropical island ending. Like, he just wanted to have the gang for as long as possible. And it almost felt like he was just sort of stringing him along with, we need one more big score, one more big score, one more big score, you know? And I kind of thought, and this didn't happen, but I sort of thought, like, a huge turn would be, like, they would find out that he's had enough money stashed away for a long time to be able to make that escape, but he's just doesn't want to give up the life and is putting everybody at risk. That's not how it turned out, but, you know, I agree with you on the killing of the Saint Denis, sort of, you know, the godfather, so to speak, in Saint Denis. You know, I think that's kind of that's a huge turning point where you really realize, like, there's no going back for him at this point. But with Micah kind of comes in, and I think Micah sort of represents the worst of Dutch, whereas Arthur maybe represented the best in him, what he used to be. But what were your thoughts on Micah? Because we were both like, you remember me playing, I was ahead of you, but I was saying, like, there's one character I really hope I get to kill by the end. And I figured you'd be able to guess, and you did. But he is just, like, a completely unlikable character in a really great way, because it helps drive the story. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I hated him so much. As soon as, like, chapter 4, I think, is what, even at the end of chapter 3, maybe. No, it was about chapter 4. End of chapter 4, end of chapter 5, and the rest of the game. Like, he was awful person. And I really wanted to shoot him in the head. And I did get the chance to do that. So that was fun. But yeah, I get it. It's great writing. They made a character that I absolutely hate. And they made it like Dutch kind of trusted Micah more than Arthur, because Micah kept kind of like wanting to go with Dutch to do more missions in bloody ways, whereas Arthur was like, no, we need to, like, be smart about this. And yeah, I agree with your assessment that, yeah, Arthur and Micah were kind of like the two, like, Arthur was,
it's like the angel
Dutch,
and the devil on the shoulder, right?
Yes.
So, And you could see, like, and I think too, once Dutch went to this place where he's only taking counsel from Micah and Arthur's kind of being pushed out, that was like point of no return in a way, right? Like, he's completely abandoned everything good and noble that he might have been for this, like, almost bloodthirsty, just really greedy type of thing. And you see it in, like, the missions with the like Native Americans towards the end of the game, where, you know, Arthur gets involved to try to save them, and Dutch gets involved to manipulate and use them, and basically use them as pawns. He knows he's sending them to slaughter, but using them to further his goals. And Micah's like pushing him to do that. So I think, you know, Micah plays a really important role in Dutch's sort of downfall, mentally anyway, as the game goes on. But so that's why I want to talk about those two together, because I think they're very much joined. Because the more crazy Dutch gets, the more prominent Micah gets, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of see that, and then, you know, you go all the way to the very ending of the game, in the epilogues, they're still together, right?
Did that surprise you?
Yes, but it made sense to me when I saw it, because it's like, yep, Dutch has completely embraced what Micah stood for, so of course Micah's still with Dutch, right?
Yeah. The only thing that confused me was because at the end of chapter 6, you're fighting Micah as Arthur, and then Dutch comes out, and like Micah walks away, and Dutch walks the opposite way.
Yep.
And kind of leaves Arthur to die. Now, depending on your choice,
and we chose the opposite thing, so
we did.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a minute. It did surprise me that Dutch comes out of the cabin in some ways. As soon as it happened, though, I expected it. Like, I was like, well, I did kind of see it coming, but even the ending to that doesn't really make sense to me. Like, I didn't understand why Dutch shot Micah. Because there was nothing in the story that led up to Dutch finally understanding that it was Micah that sold the gang out to the Pinkertons. And so I guess that was the reason, but like, why didn't he believe Arthur and he believed John? Like, I thought he didn't like John even more than he didn't like Arthur.
Well, no, he mentioned a few times in the story how he kind of viewed John as his son in a way. And, you know, John joined the gang at a very young age and kind of grew up with them, and, you know, Dutch saw himself as like a father to him. So in that moment at the end, and when Arthur said it to him, he wasn't going to believe Arthur anymore, because he became convinced that Arthur was working against him and, you know, was no longer loyal to him.
Right, so, but I thought he also put John in that boat with Arthur, because Arthur was talking about John. He was like, we need to let John like go, and he was like, what was the word? Oh my gosh.
Well, and he left him to die on the train, right?
Yeah, that's why I was like, he's just as mad at John, if not more, because I think he also, like, it makes sense for him to think that John was the reason Arthur had started, like, betraying him in a way, you know, or turned on him.
At the very end, the way I took it, and, you know, I can be totally off on this, but the way I took it is, like, Arthur had to face down everything he's done in that moment. It's almost like, you know, to me, it was almost like the Return of the Jedi Darth Vader moment on the Death Star, where he has to decide, you know, what to do. And he saw like he said, he referred to John as a son repeatedly throughout the game. So I almost thought that, you know, it's almost like what have I done type of moment. And he finally at the end does at least the kind of right thing. Yeah, you can't, but then he walks away knowing damn well there's a bunch of money inside the cabin, right? So he leaves it for John as well. It's almost like he's saying, you know, yeah, I do view you as my son, and I was wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And Dutch just walks off, and he's gone. That's how I kind of viewed it, as that moment of truth decision. But I could be wrong on that.
Oh, you're talking about Dutch. I thought you were talking about Arthur for a second.
No, Dutch, sorry.
Yeah, with Dutch, the ending kind of shows that Dutch didn't care at all about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the gang, and two, just I think he enjoyed it too much. He enjoyed the life. And even at the end, like, yeah, he did kill Micah because it finally got through that Micah betrayed him. John just had the chance for better, and maybe he understood that, maybe not. And maybe it was at a like some weird love thing that he let him kind of go and take the money. But I think it shows a lot about Arthur's like mentality about why he keeps doing what he did. I don't actually remember too much in the original game. I vaguely remember fighting Dutch on the mountain, but I don't remember any of the lines. So I kind of want to go play the first or Red Dead Redemption 1 and do that again. It's just Mexico throwing me off here, but
I want to play it as well again. So I probably will, sometime during December. But I thought like that was an interesting moment. But let's talk about the decision that you have. The final decision you make as Arthur in the game, which is, do you continue on with John to help them sort of escape, or do you go back for the money? Now, you chose the noble thing to help John get out. I chose to go for the money. I'm glad we chose opposite things because we can talk about it. But I figured my thinking was, well, I know John's going to make it, so I'll go for the money and see what happens. But talk about kind of what you did and, the difference, because it plays out much the same, but in different settings and stuff like that. So go ahead.
Yeah. I chose to go with John because Arthur doesn't know that John is going to live. And the way everything up to that point, Arthur was in the mood that, like, trying to get John out. So going to help John just made more sense story-wise. Because remember, like, Arthur doesn't have the knowledge, that John will live going forward. So I went with John, and you kind of you fight off Pinkertons going up the mountain, and then, like, Arthur kind of hands John the stuff at the top of the mountain and sends him on his way, and he's like, I don't have the strength to do it anymore. And then, all of a sudden, you start getting attacked by Micah, and then you have a fight with Micah, and then Dutch comes out, and then they both walk away. But I think you said it was the same thing, except you just go attack Pinkertons on the way to the money. Is that right, in the cave?
Yep, yeah, you get in a big fight again, and you end up, after one of the saddest moments in the game, by the way, where the horse dies.
Yes, I was so attached to my horse.
I was too. But you with the way I did it, you go into the cave, you find the money stashed like under like a wagon or something. Mm-hmm. Bring it out. You're carrying it over your shoulder, and then Micah attacks you, and you end up basically doing a fist fight, but you get stabbed, and eventually Arthur just from weakness just collapses, and is left to die while Micah takes the bag and runs like back into the cave, and then Dutch just kind of walks the other way and is gone, and that's like the last thing you see of Arthur. That's lying there.
That's not how the ending happens on the mountain. It's like you do get attacked by Micah, but then you're fighting him off, and you pull a gun, and then you guys fall off like like a cliff onto a lower cliff, and then you start crawling to the gun, and then Dutch, like when you're about to reach it, Dutch does the old movie trope where he kind of steps on your hand while your hand's on the gun, and then it ends with like some more jawing at each other, and then Dutch and Micah take off in opposite directions, and then Arthur kind of drags himself to lie against the rock, and watch the sun rise. And it was very nice, but I don't remember. He probably got stabbed a little bit. Actually, I think he did, but I just remember the gun scene. Like it looked like you might get the gun and then shoot Micah, and that doesn't happen. I was like, shoot. I
know, but you have to leave it because ultimately, John's the one who basically ends the gang, so to speak, right? But I thought it was really cool how, Arthur hands off his satchel, which includes the journal, so he can kind of, all the side missions you picked up and haven't finished yet by the end of the story. Like, John now has all the information on that, so you can continue playing after the credits are over. Let's talk about the world, though. The closer you get to the end of the game, you start seeing some of the stuff from the original, which is kind of cool. You were really kind of fired up to see Armadillo, right?
I was.
And I keep wanting to say Amarillo because I'm pretty sure that's what it's actually based on. But yeah, that showed up. The canyon showed up that you see in the first game, and you start to see some of that. And it makes sense because now you're playing from a sort of a home base, a camp, so to speak, which is John's house that it's going to be in the original. So, thoughts on the world in general, though?
The world was sprawling. There was a lot of different environments. There was kind of the swampy Louisiana-esque area down in the southeast of the map, and then up in the north you had the mountains with snow, and then the northwest you had the snowy forest area, and then in the middle you had the kind of just prairie lands. And so there's a lot of different environments, and the map was big. It took a minute to and I don't mean 60 seconds, when I say it took a minute to get across the map. It took 5 or 10 sometime if you're trying to ride on horseback. But it was beautiful. I played on my 1X in 4K the entire time. The game was absolutely gorgeous. There was a lot to do. There's a lot of different side quests, side activities, hunting, fishing, games you could play like blackjack and dominoes and all of that. And it was just, there was a lot to do in it. And it was just a great world building world. I think it had less activities than the Grand Theft Auto series, but I think that was kind of on purpose, and because there would be less activities you could do. But I do think they got rid of some of the fun stuff that I enjoyed, like Liar's Dice and Horseshoes from the original, that I really wish would have made an appearance, because I loved playing Liar's Dice.
I got lost playing Horseshoes in the first one. Not lost in the game, but time-wise,
Yeah.
So that, I was kind of bummed out to see that not there. But, yeah, there have been complaints about it being too slow, and especially having to ride the horse across the map, basically, to get to some of the missions. But I felt like they did a pretty decent job with that, because you almost always run into a couple of little optional things along the way to kind of break up that monotony. So if you just choose to ignore those and keep going, like I did sometimes, yeah, it can be a long ride to the destination. But otherwise, I feel like the world was extremely well built, a lot of thought and care put into it, a lot of detail. I love how, as you progress into the epilogues, the cities now have lights and electricity and stuff like that. Whereas they didn't early on in the game. So that's really cool too. Just those details put in there sets Rockstar apart in a lot of ways from competitors. Even something as small as when the cinematics start, you get the black bars on the top and bottom of the screen. So it's like a movie. And I think that'll, little things like that make the game much more immersive as well. Because then when it expands back to full screen, okay, I'm taking over again. So, little things like that I think are great. I love the world. What was your favorite city?
Probably Valentine, the first city you go to. I don't know, I really enjoyed that city. It was compact enough where I could get to everywhere pretty quickly, but it didn't have the I didn't like Strawberry that much.
Mm-hmm.
It had
Strawberry's
too much,
really small.
Yeah, it was too small and it had too many levels to it, I thought.
Yeah.
And Santa Anita was way too big to be my favorite. So yeah, Valentine I think was my number one.
Yeah.
Or Rhodes. I really actually liked Rhodes.
Yeah, Rhodes is pretty cool too, but I'm gonna have to agree with you on Valentine. That's probably my favorite. It also was not even close to a long ride to get to town from camp. So I felt like the game progressed pretty quickly in that part of the game.
Yeah.
So What was your favorite chapter, story-wise? Because each chapter sort of had a little mini story within it.
That's a tough one. Not chapter 4. 4 was the one where you're down in Guarma, right?
It was 4 or 5. I don't exactly remember.
That was my least favorite.
Yeah, mine as well.
They did learn their lesson from the first Red Dead game by not making it so long like they did in Mexico. But I'd say probably the Valentine, the first chapter that was not in the stove. So I think that's chapter 2. Was probably my favorite. Though I actually really did like the Braithwaites and Greys from chapter 3.
Yeah, I think that was my favorite, actually. Just kind of seeing that progress. I actually really enjoyed that. Up to, all the way to the ending where the house is burning down and, the, like the matriarch of the family basically was walking back into the house.
Yeah. Guarma was chapter 5 because, now that I'm,
And so, I think, it was my least favorite chapter as well, but I think it's necessary because all they talked about was the tropical island, right? And then they end up on one, and it's not what they thought it was going to be, right? So it's those dreams kind of get crushed there as well. One thing I do want to point out is we were talking about Arthur's tuberculosis, but there's a definite moment in the game where you actually contract it. And that's doing the collecting the debt with the guy who's like in his little farm area who's sick and coughing, and you beat him up. That's where he contracts that disease. So even that is accounted for in the game, which I think is just awesome and amazing.
Is that guaranteed?
Yes.
Was that mission? I thought that mission was optional though.
No, I think those you have to do. I'm not.
The first collecting debts were
Yep.
story missions?
Yep.
All right.
So yeah, that's where he actually contracts it. So I think that's awesome that was accounted for.
How did you find that out?
I was reading something on the game, and they kind of talked back some of the key story points, and were putting some stuff together. And I kind of thought it was that anyway, because the guy was obviously really sick, and I knew that the biggest disease of the time was tuberculosis. And the way he was just coughing and really weak and stuff, I was like, he probably has that. And then as I saw Arthur, I noticed the coughing with Arthur somewhat early. And I'm like, I wonder if he got it there. And especially once he passes out in town, and goes and gets diagnosed. I'm like, God, I wonder if he got it right there. So, but that was actually confirmed in something that I read. Might have been IGN or Kotaku. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, that's where he actually gets it, is right there. Because you can only get it by, taking in, some bodily fluid, like saliva, spit, blood, whatever, from someone who has it. So that's where he actually got it. But yeah, I thought that was a kind of a cool, little thing to put in the game to account for how he gets it. But, alright. So before this turns into, a 2-hour thing, let's, we talked about the world, we talked about some of the characters, so let's get into our community. Actually did a community review for the game, and thanks to everybody who submitted feedback on it. We really appreciate that. But just some of their thoughts, and then we'll kind of comment on them as well. The favorite things about the game, just I'll pick some out from the community. They love the open world and characters. How alive the game feels. I think we kind of spoke to that a little bit. Somebody called out poker, which I thought was really fun too. I sat down and played poker for an hour and a half once in the game. The overall story, somebody said they really loved the slow pace of the game, which I actually agree with. I know that there's a contingent out there that don't, and that's totally fine. But for me, I think it made the game more immersive and better. Somebody said third-person single-player immersion games are their favorite, like Uncharted or Last of Us, and that game, that Red Dead 2, is a perfection on the genre. So, go. Did you have something?
No.
Okay. So, least favorite things from our community, and again, I'll just kind of pick some out here. Somebody said that you can only take one smoke from your cigarette. I guess if you're getting into realism, I suppose that counts. Somebody did say the monotony of it. We'll talk about that in a second before we kind of wrap up. Somebody said they didn't really like the cores and having to maintain things like weight, hair, bathing, etc. Let's see. Too easy to commit crimes on accident. So when we talk about glitches, I kind of want to talk about that. And somebody said they'd like to see a little more nuance from NPCs when you make a mistake. So again, like not being immediately shot at the moment you bump into somebody's horse, you know? We talked about missions. So favorite missions from our community. They call a couple of them called out where you get like completely trashed with Lenny in the saloon. I thought that one was awesome.
That was a good
That was a great mission. And a lot of people called out the side missions that are just available throughout the game. So there's actually a serial killer sequence in the game that I haven't done yet, and I want to do when I go back through it again. But you kind of discover a serial killer by finding the bodies and putting the clues together. And then favorite characters from our community, Dutch, let's see, Sadie, John. Quite a few votes for Sadie, actually, as I look through here. And then somebody mentioned Hosea, who we haven't really talked about at all.
That was my favorite, or that was one of my two favorites. I loved Hosea from the very beginning. The first mission you do with him to go hunt the legendary bear, that kind of starts the legendary hunting missions. I loved that mission, and I absolutely loved Hosea from that.
Do you think there's any coincidence that when Hosea gets killed, Dutch really falls apart? You know, like in terms of him, you know, his mental state.
A little, I'd imagine so, because Hosea was like the one guy who always kind of disagreed with Dutch, but not in like a bad, quote unquote, disrespectful way. Like I just thought he kind of kept him honest sometimes.
Yep.
And not having the good angel on his shoulder, because I don't think Arthur really fit the mold. Like Arthur kind of stepped into Hosea's place when Hosea died, but not well. Hosea was always that, you know, good angel on the shoulder, as you put it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. So
no Lenny votes though?
What's that?
No Lenny votes from our community?
Yeah, no, there's a couple here. Just not as many as some of the others.
Lenny was my two.
Yeah, Lenny's a pretty good character. So had a lot of fun with that. With missions that involved him. So let's talk glitches real quick, because the game does have a contingent of people that say it's either hugely overrated or it's just not that good. And when we give our community overall score for the game, that's represented there because a couple people gave it like 3 out of 10. But so glitches in the game, the ones that stand out for me, there's 2 of them that I just hate. Is one, when you bump into somebody with your horse, they immediately like open fire on you.
Yep.
And then 2, the at the camp, the location where you either donate to the camp or you purchase upgrades. The ledger. So when you go to select the ledger, you like move to it and then stop, and it's really awkward and weird, and then you have to select it again.
Yep.
To open it. That one to me was sort of jarring. It always kind of took me out of the immersion of the game. I'm sure you experienced both those. Any others that you can think of?
Yeah, no, the ledger one was the one I always think of when I say it was the one that yanks you out. But another one was the like a lot of the pathing for your character, like when you tried to hitch your horse or tried to get on your horse or tried to pull something off your horse, like it would take a weird route and it wouldn't do it, and then you'd be like, what the dang hell is happening right now?
Yeah, agreed.
But I'm just gonna give a quick little like anecdote about the first thing you said was bumping into someone. I was in Strawberry and I was walking. I might have been jogging, and I think I ran. Like I looked away from my game for one reason or another, and I looked back and I had accidentally bumped into a wagon. Like I bumped into, like I was on foot and I bumped into a wagon, and it said there was a bounty on my head for assault. I'm like, are you kidding me? They ran me over with their wagon.
Yeah.
That one made me upset. So yeah, that stuff. And then also, I don't know how many of you guys took advantage of the cinematic like trailer mode you could put on. But basically, if you're riding, like if you set a path up and you're riding there, you can hold the back or the select button, or I don't know what it is on the PS4. I don't know if it's I doubt it's the share. So
yeah,
it's
got to be something else. It might be just holding down the touchpad. Yeah.
Yeah, left on the left side of the touchpad. Anyways, you turn the cinematic camera on, and it takes you there automatically. You don't have to control the horse. You can control the speed by like mashing A if you want, or like speeding up and braking, but you don't have to actually control it. And it kind of does the cinematic thing where it switches camera angles every now and again.
Sure.
But there were quite a few times where where the horse got upset with other people on the road and ran into him, and I did get a murder bounty because I ran over someone one time while I wasn't quite paying attention to the game. I was looking at my phone, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you would think they would make this so it would work, but that's like minor gripes because the game, it's amazing.
When we're calling out stuff like the ledger glitch, that means that they've accomplished something really good overall. You know, like when that's what we're complaining about, I feel like, you know, that's a pretty minor thing. That because I didn't go to the ledger like all that often, probably a total of, I don't know, 15 times. So it just wasn't ever that big of a deal, I guess. It's just annoying when it happens because it does take you out of sort of that immersion that we talked about. But all right, let's give this game a score and then get out of here. So let's start with our community. Our community gave this game, as a whole, 8.8 out of 10. And I will say that if you take out the outlier scores, because we had a handful that gave it like 3 or 4, the game is well over a 9 in our community. But we're going to count everybody. And it's an 8.8 out of 10 for them. Steven, out of 10, what do you give it?
Real quick, as someone who has done statistics and statistical analysis, you get rid of the outliers because they're outliers and they don't matter. Okay, that's ridiculous.
Well, so
just going to put my foot down here.
If it was one of them, then sure. But there were enough there.
I mean, that's why no one cares about like the community reviews on Metacritic. Like, come on, how can you say this game is a 3? Like, give me an actual reason why you rated this a 3, and maybe I'll accept it. Because if it's just a 3 because you didn't like it, you're wrong here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Because the game's a 10. There are glitches, but 10 doesn't mean perfect. 10 means a masterpiece, and this is absolutely a masterpiece. It is. I saw a New York Times article yesterday or 2 days ago. It came out on Friday the 23rd, saying that the biggest blockbuster of the year wasn't from a TV show or a movie, it was Red Dead Redemption 2, and I have to agree with that. The story is absolutely phenomenal. It's the best story I've heard in a while across all the mediums. So yeah, this game's a 10. There's no question. Like, you may not like the pacing of it, but the pacing's good. It's just, it might not be for you, but it doesn't make it bad.
Yeah, and again, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, I don't like The Last of Us, but I know that game has a 10 story. I think the gameplay isn't so fun, but I know it's a good game overall.
Yeah.
Borderline great. Like, it's at least an 8 or a 9, if not a 10. Like, come on.
And honestly, like, when I had to read the book Crime and Punishment, I hated it, but it's considered a classic for a reason. And in a more modern example for me, like, you and Graham give me crap all the time because I don't necessarily love Game of Thrones that much. Now, that doesn't mean I think it's terrible. I understand how many people love it and all the awards it wins, so it's obviously good. It's just not for me. So I wouldn't rate Game of Thrones though like a 3 or a 2. I just might not rate it at all. You know what I mean? Just to be fair. But or I would say, okay, yeah, I don't like this, but I understand that it's really good, so it's probably still like a 9. It's just not for me. But, so I agree with you on that. So anyway, our community, though, gave it an 8.8 as a, comprehensive score. So anyway, you said a 10?
I did.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you here. This game is a masterpiece. Now, masterpiece doesn't mean, like you said, it does not mean perfect. No game ever is glitch-free and perfect. There just isn't one. So we can't hold it to that standard because that's an impossible standard to hit. But the game is as good of a story as I've played. The characters are as interesting as I've seen for how many characters there are. The world is huge. It sucks you in, makes you feel like you're in 1899. And it's just, to me, it's the best video game I've ever played. And it's really not that close. So I think if this game doesn't win Game of the Year, there's something really wrong. That's my opinion. So, any last thoughts on the game before we get out of here?
No, if I do recommend playing this game. Well, I assume everyone's played this game, so I'm not going to even say this.
Yeah.
Like, just go play it again. I think it's worth another playthrough. I'm excited to see Red Dead Online. I'm excited to see what expansions we might see. I'm hoping. I know it's not going to happen, but I'm hoping that they kind of put the whole first game in as an expansion, so you can play through the whole campaign. Even if it's just like the story, like I don't need the side quests and stuff, just because I'd love to play it in the world they've built with the gameplay they have now, rather than go back to a 2010 title. But the game's a 10. It's amazing, like amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, we're thinking about doing like 35 minutes here. I think we're more at like 55 minutes. So. Hey, bonus material. And this is, by the way, is a patron timed exclusive. So patrons will get it today. We're recording on a Sunday. And it'll be up on Patreon tonight. And for everybody else, it'll be available probably by Wednesday this coming week. So if you want to get this type of stuff as early as you possibly can, because usually when we do timed exclusives, it's a bigger gap in time between putting them on Patreon and then putting them out for everyone. This one, though, because it took us a while to get through the game, we just want to have it be relevant time-wise still, but for everybody. But if you want to get this type of exclusive content right when it comes out, the best way to do that is to go to patreon.com/gaminghub and join up there. And at any level on Patreon, you get this exclusive content. So, all right, that's going to do it for episode 136, and we'll be back this coming week with 137. Until then, have a great week, everybody. Play this game again. If you've already finished it, it is as good as it gets in video games. And we will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.